Gay couple vanished on canyon hike. For years later, a jogger uncovers a chilling journal. A couple set out for a quiet hike in the dusky hills of Arroyo del Viento, a lesser-known trail system in southern Arizona, just a few miles outside of Sierra Blanca. It was supposed to be one final, breath-steadying escape before life changed forever. Mateo Salazar and Lucas Weaver were expecting their first child through surrogacy in just under a month. Their surrogate, Rebecca, was staying with Mateo's sister in Phoenix, giving the couple one last weekend of stillness, a space between who they were and who they were about to become. They packed light: water, protein bars, a blanket, and Lucas's old film camera, the one he swore always made the sky look more honest. The morning air had started cool but carried a warning heat in its bones. They checked in with the park ranger at the visitors' kiosk, left their names, and set off on Trail 14, a path neither had hiked before, but Mateo had mapped carefully, confident it would be gentle enough for a short midday hike. And then they vanished. No sign of struggle. No returned car. No phone signal. The only trace left behind was a half-empty bottle of water, resting on a sun-baked boulder near a rock overhang, and the lingering GPS ping from Lucas's smartwatch, which stopped broadcasting at precisely 2:46 p.m. on July 6, 2019. For years, that single time stamp haunted everyone who loved them. Friends, family, law enforcement, volunteers. It was the moment the earth seemed to swallow them. It was the moment two futures, a family's future, were suspended in limbo. Lucas's brother, David, led weekly search efforts for the first year, even after the official investigation cooled. Mateo's mother, Carmen, set up a website, a hotline, and paid for digital billboards that blinked their faces against the skyline of Tucson and Sierra Blanca. And yet time passed, and grief, that slow, devouring thing, settled into the edges of their lives. For years came and went like a storm that never fully broke. And just as the story of their disappearance began to feel like a memory even the desert itself had buried, the silence cracked. It was early spring when everything changed. A jogger named Isaiah Monroe was out with his dog, a retired bloodhound named Cheddar, who now enjoyed slow, tail-wagging hikes along the quieter paths of the arroyo. Isaiah had taken a turn off Trail 9, a fork the rangers had closed after last year's landslide, not to explore, but because Cheddar had suddenly veered off course, nose low to the ground, growling low. Isaiah followed instinctively, calling out to him, the leash stretching taut. They crossed an old washout, climbed a crumbling ledge, and arrived at a shallow alcove beneath a rock overhang. The air was cooler there, the dirt untouched for what felt like years. Cheddar began digging, and then he whimpered, a hollow, wounded sound that didn't match his normally fearless demeanor. Isaiah knelt, brushing away the dust with careful hands. At first, he thought it was a bone. Then he saw the glint of metal, a titanium plate screwed into a length of fractured bone, a femur, human, and beside it, a crushed film canister. Inside, miraculously preserved, was a single roll of exposed 35mm film, still sealed, as if waiting to tell its story. News of the discovery spread like wildfire through Sierra Blanca within hours. The film canister was handed over to the Sierra County Sheriff's Department, then quickly rerouted to the State Forensic Lab in Tucson. The moment the media got wind of hikers' remains being found near Arroyo del Viento, Mateo and Lucas's names resurfaced like ghosts from a long drought. Carmen Salazar, who had never stopped keeping her son's room exactly as he left it, drove the 2 hours to the sheriff's office without calling ahead. David Weaver, who'd been living in Portland by then, booked a red-eye flight after hearing the news from a college friend who still followed the old Facebook page. For 4 years, people had spoken about Mateo and Lucas in past tense with the kind of softened tone reserved for those presumed gone. But now they had something tangible. Not a rumor, Not a drone scan. An artifact. The lab worked fast. The bone, based on DNA, belonged to Lucas Weaver. There was no doubt. The titanium plate matched a surgery he'd had on his right femur after a skateboarding accident back in 2009. But more importantly, almost impossibly, the film inside the canister was developable. And when the first scans were released, they sent a ripple through every person who had ever touched the case. The roll contained 17 photos. The first 6 were what you'd expect. Wide landscape shots, canyons, one blurry selfie of the 2 men squinting into the sun, Lucas's arm thrown casually around Mateo's shoulder. But the last 5, those were different. They were darker, less posed, and increasingly strange. One showed a collapsed ridge, maybe taken by accident, crooked and blurred. Another captured what looked like drag marks in the dirt. The final image was the one no one could stop staring at. It showed Lucas's foot, bare, bloodied at the heel, resting against a moss-covered stone. And in the background, just barely visible between 2 large rocks, was what appeared to be a man's silhouette, partially hidden watching. Carmen fainted when she saw it. David didn't speak for nearly 20 minutes, just sat with the printout clenched in his hands, knuckles white. The sheriff, a seasoned man with 30 years of desert search and rescue under his belt, called in a new task force that afternoon. What had once been deemed a tragic misadventure, 2 hikers lost in the heat, was suddenly being reconsidered as something far darker. And as search crews returned to Arroyo del Viento with fresh eyes and forensic gear, they discovered something no one had thought to look for before. A narrow fissure behind the rock overhang, just wide enough for a person to squeeze through, leading into a chamber of limestone and shadow that hadn't been marked on any public maps. Inside, they found traces of fire, charred wood, animal bones, an old camping stove, and most chilling of all, 2 zippered sleeping bags, both covered in dust but intact. A notebook lay between them, its pages brittle with age but still legible. It was Lucas's handwriting. His first entry was dated July 6th, 2019. His last was dated August 3rd, nearly 4 weeks later. They hadn't died that day. They had survived. The notebook was the size of a palm and bound in cracked brown leather. Faded, but not destroyed. Somehow, in the suffocating Arizona heat and the suffocating darkness of that hidden chamber, it had endured. The cover was stained with something dried and dark, possibly blood, though no one said it aloud. When the forensic team brought it in, Carmen and David were asked if they wanted to see it before it was documented. They both said yes. They sat in a quiet interview room, just the 2 of them, and opened it like it was a sacred object. The first entry was brief. Still no signal. Still no idea how far we are from Trail 14. Mateo twisted his ankle bad coming down that rock slide. I think we're both in shock. It's hotter than we expected. Water's running low. We're gonna stay in this cave overnight. It's cool in here. Might be safer. We'll try again tomorrow. Day after day, Lucas chronicled everything. Their decisions, their injuries, their fear. Mateo's ankle is worse. Swollen like a grapefruit. He's trying to pretend it's fine, but I know he's hurting. We rationed the last water bottle. I'm going to hike out tomorrow, early. I marked the rocks with my jacket. God, I hope I can find the trail again. But then the tone shifted. About 10 pages in, the handwriting grew shakier. The sentences started to fracture. And then came the entry that made Diane, the lead investigator, excuse herself to cry in the hallway. He was watching us last night. I know it wasn't a hallucination. There's someone out here. I saw him, just past the mouth of the cave. No flashlight, just standing there. Mateo says I'm imagining it, but I know what I saw. His clothes were old, like weirdly old. He didn't move when I called out, just turned and walked away. I didn't sleep. There were no more landscape photos after that date. No more attempts to mark the trail or hike out. only entries that slowly descended into fear. I heard whistling. Mateo did too. Not a bird. A tune. I don't recognize it. We're blocking the cave entrance now. Piling stones. He keeps coming back at night. Lucas began describing a man with a scar over one eye. Said he had seen the man once before in town, near a gas station. He stared at us too long, Lucas wrote. Mateo thought I was being paranoid, but he remembered the guy when I described the scar. The notebook ended abruptly. The final entry, scrawled in shaky handwriting, barely legible. If someone finds this, please don't think we just got lost. Someone was following us, watching, and when we stopped, he waited. I think he wanted us to give up, but Mateo didn't. He kept me alive, even when I couldn't walk. He's still out there. I hope he's still out there. It was dated August 3rd, 28 days after they went missing. That changed everything. The media went feral. Couple survived 28 days after vanishing. Evidence suggests they were stalked. Notebook tells story authorities ignored. The park was temporarily shut down. Trail 14 was blocked off. Forensic teams returned to the area with a fine-toothed comb, and sniffer dogs were brought in from neighboring counties. But the heat had long since claimed most evidence. What they did find, however, was chilling. Fragments of old cloth, buried under brush, that matched neither Mateo's nor Lucas's clothes. A fire pit still damp beneath the top layer of ash. And a set of boot prints, different tread, larger size, leading away from the hidden chamber and into a ravine that led nowhere. The search for a body, or a suspect, began all over again. Mateo's wasn't found. Not yet. Not in the chamber. Only Lucas. Only the notebook. Only silence. The recovery of Lucas's remains and his notebook had cracked open a case long thought closed. But with the new attention came a deeper, stranger question. What happened to Mateo Salazar? And why, after nearly 4 years, did only one of them surface, literally and figuratively? Investigators weren't just looking for a body now. They were looking for a man who might have survived after surviving the unthinkable. The last known proof of Mateo's existence had been a line in Lucas's notebook, one filled with love, fear, and absolute uncertainty. But there was something about the way Lucas had written it. He's still out there. I hope he's still out there, that caught people. It didn't feel like farewell. It felt like belief. Diane Alvarez, the sheriff's lead investigator, became obsessed with the notebook. She carried it with her everywhere, flipping it open during briefings, studying every loop in Lucas's handwriting, searching for patterns, hidden meanings, anything missed by the forensic team. And it was Diane who spotted something everyone else overlooked. On 3 separate entries in the lower right corner, Lucas had drawn the same tiny symbol, a triangle with a curved line through it. Not quite a signature, not quite a code. David Weaver remembered it immediately. That's Mateo's personal sign, he told Diane. He doodled that in the margins of his journals. Said it was his way of reminding himself that everything's part of a bigger shape. You just don't always see it yet. The symbol gave Diane a new thread to pull. If Mateo had added it, or if Lucas was using it as a signal, then maybe there were other messages. Hidden notes. Clues embedded in the way the journal was written. She brought in a handwriting analyst and a forensic linguist. What they found wasn't a message per se, but a change. Starting in late July, the syntax of the journal shifted. Lucas began referring to someone as the other man, but not in the way he had described the stalker. This man was different. The other man talks to Mateo when I'm asleep. Mateo says the other man used to be someone else. I don't hear him, but Mateo says he does. And then, Mateo was talking to someone outside the cave last night. I asked who. He wouldn't say. The implications were unnerving. Had Mateo broken? Had isolation, heat, and injury fractured his mind? Or was there someone else out there, separate from the man with the scar? When the forensics team returned to the site with updated ground-penetrating radar, they found a series of disturbances in the soil, shallow depressions in a tight semicircle, about 100 yards from the cave entrance. They began digging. Nothing. But then, under a pile of stones shaped like a makeshift cairn, they found something extraordinary. An old metal lunchbox, rusted shut, but still intact. Inside, a torn piece of canvas, a child's drawing, a tree and a red figure beside a blue one, and a photograph. It was of Matteo, but it wasn't from the hike. He looked thinner, paler, his beard longer. The background was wooded, but not desert. Mountains in the distance. Pines, not mesquite. And the timestamp on the photo, barely legible in the corner, was December 18th, 2019. 5 months after they disappeared. Which meant one thing. Matteo had survived. Longer than anyone thought. Longer than even Lucas knew. And someone had been keeping him. The photo shattered what little remained of the original theory. That Matteo had perished soon after Lucas, maybe lost in the wilderness or claimed by exposure. This wasn't just survival. It was sustained existence, captured months later in a place that didn't match the terrain where they'd vanished. If the timestamp was real, an initial forensic review confirmed it hadn't been digitally altered. Then Matteo had either been moved or had moved himself. But where? How? And most terrifying of all, with whom? Diane called an emergency press briefing that night. "We are treating the Matteo Salazar disappearance as an active abduction case," she said, reading from her notes with a voice that trembled only slightly. "We now have evidence that he survived past the known timeline, and we are working under the assumption that he may still be alive." The media frenzy reignited, and with it came a storm of false sightings, online conspiracy theorists, and opportunistic podcasters. But among the noise, one credible voice emerged, a ranger named Nolan Reyes, who had worked the Arroyo del Viento Park during the fall and winter of 2019. "I remember someone matching Matteo's description," Nolan told Diane. "Came through late one night in October. Looked like hell. Said he was looking for the reservation trail that ran north through San Vinas Canyon." Nolan hadn't thought much of it at the time. The man was quiet, polite, and clearly exhausted, sunburnt, dirty, and gaunt. He didn't look like a threat, just lost. Diane pulled satellite maps and confirmed that the San Vinas Trail ran directly into a remote region known as El Silencio Ridge, private land, mostly unpatrolled, bordered by old mining roads and scattered homesteads. Locals had long whispered about strange activity in the area. Lights at night, droning sounds, hunters going missing. Most of it was chalked up to old desert myths. But now it felt different. It felt intentional. A team was assembled. Drones were launched. On the second day of aerial surveillance, one drone captured a clearing. In the middle was a burned-out truck, old, rusted, abandoned. Beside it, faint in the dirt, were drag marks, leading from the truck toward what looked like a subterranean hatch built into the hillside. They sent boots in. The hatch was real, reinforced steel, welded shut from the outside. It took hours to breach. When they got inside, they found what could only be described as an underground shelter, maybe 20 feet deep. It was crude, concrete walls, a cot, a bucket toilet, and scribbles all over the walls. Hundreds of them, in black marker, charcoal, sometimes even blood. Some were drawings, symbols, triangles with curved lines, repeating endlessly. Others were sentences, loops of thoughts spiraling into madness. And then the most chilling. "The man in red watches me when I sleep. He took my name. Lucas is gone. But I am not. I am not. I am not." They didn't find Matteo. Not physically. But there were signs, old food wrappers, a still warm cup of black coffee, a journal dated 2 weeks earlier. The writing was erratic, nearly unreadable, but one page stood out. On it, in shaky letters, Tell David I remember the stars. Diane stared at it for a long time. Mateo was alive, or had been. He wasn't just a missing person. He was a kept person, held in a place where time and identity had blurred. And someone had been watching him unravel. The man with the scar? The man in red? Were they the same? Or worse, had Mateo become something else entirely? The public didn't hear about the underground shelter right away. Diane made sure of that. The scene was too raw, too unexplainable, and the scribbled messages on the walls were disturbing in ways that felt more spiritual than criminal. As if something in that space hadn't just hurt Mateo, but had changed him. The forensic team documented everything, but they moved like people in a church made of shadows. Even the most hardened among them admitted it. The bunker felt wrong, as if time had bent strangely down there. David was shown the photos in private, the journal page with his name on it, the cup, the writing, the words. His fingers hovered over the printouts like they were burning. "He's trying to come back," he whispered, not to anyone in the room, but to the version of his brother he hoped could still hear him. And then, without being asked, he said, "The stars," he means the planetarium. When they were kids, David and Mateo had gone to the old observatory in Sierra Blanca every summer. One time, Mateo had snuck out of bed, dragged David to the telescope deck, and pointed to the constellations, naming them all. "This one's ours," he said, drawing a triangle in the air. David had forgotten that night until the journal triggered the memory like a match to dry paper. Diane sent a unit to the planetarium, even though it had been closed for years. The front was boarded up, rust covering the dome. Inside, most of the old projection equipment had been stripped, but something near the center of the main floor stopped the officers cold. A sleeping bag, a candle, and a folded piece of paper wedged into the torn cushion of the old theater seats. It wasn't much, just a sentence. One sentence. I still remember the last thing he said. The handwriting matched Mateo's. Every move he made was deliberate. He was leaving them a path. But it wasn't linear. It twisted. It doubled back on itself. He wasn't just surviving, he was running. Or maybe hiding. From who? From the man in red? From the man with the scar? From himself? Then came the moment no one expected. A call from a gas station 2 towns north of El Silencio Ridge. The clerk, a wiry man named Alonzo, reported a customer had come in just before midnight. Dirty, wild-eyed. Said his name was Mateo. Said he needed to call his brother. But when the clerk handed over his phone, the man stared at the screen like it didn't make sense. Then he backed away, whispered something about him still listening, and ran. Security footage confirmed it. It was Mateo. Pale, thinner than ever, beard overgrown, but him. Alive. Diane reviewed the tape 27 times. She kept pausing on Mateo's face. There was something in his expression, not confusion, not fear, recognition, as if he knew something no one else did, as if he'd seen something he couldn't ever unsee. And as she sat in the surveillance room alone that night, Diane found herself whispering a question she hadn't dared ask until then. What if the man Mateo was running from was never real at all? By the time dawn broke over Sierra Blanca, the air felt heavier, not from heat, but from the weight of something shifting. Mateo wasn't just a missing person anymore. He was a living thread, frayed, unraveling, but still present, still weaving himself into the story, one breadcrumb at a time. Diane didn't sleep. She stared at the footage of the gas station again and again, watching how Mateo's eyes darted to the corner of the ceiling. There were no visible cameras there, no mirrors, but he looked at it like he knew, like he felt watched. Paranoid? Maybe. But what if it wasn't paranoia? What if he'd lived in isolation for so long, under someone's thumb, someone who whispered rules and shaped reality, that now even freedom felt like surveillance? A search team was assembled within the hour, expanding in every direction from the station. They combed through back roads, drainage culverts, bus stops. Dogs were deployed. Every lead that came in was followed, no matter how minor. And then, nearly 12 hours later, it happened. A call from a vineyard 30 miles north, on the edge of a canyon town called Caldera Wells. A worker had found a tarp in the woods, stretched between trees like a crude shelter. Beneath it, 2 blankets, a stack of saltine crackers, and a notebook. Not hidden, placed. Diane and David were on site within the hour. This new notebook was smaller, the kind used in grade school. Blue lines, spiral bound, water damaged but legible. On the inside cover, written in shaky but familiar pen, "If David is reading this, I'm close. Don't be afraid of what I've become. I didn't ask for it. I only wanted to come home." David dropped to his knees. The search crew went silent. Diane flipped to the first page. It wasn't a letter. It was a list. Dates. Times. All of them starting after Lucas's death. Some of them matched known events, like the week the notebook was found, or the gas station sighting. Others didn't. But one entry, dated July 9th, 2020, stood out. "Saw the red man again. He's not real, but he moves like he is." And then below that, "He doesn't have a face anymore. I think I gave it to him." The writing grew more abstract after that. Pages filled with circles, triangles, eyes. The word watcher repeated more than 30 times. It was as though Mateo's mind had become a mirror, reflecting something that wasn't his but had been burned into him. Back at the station, Diane mapped the sightings, the notes, the entries. Every point Mateo had surfaced formed a slow spiral outward from Arroyo del Viento. Not random, not chaotic, intentional. Each appearance a spoke in a wheel. And if you looked closely enough, the center of that wheel, the origin point, always returned to the same place, the canyon mouth where they had first vanished, as if he were being pulled back there, as if some part of him never left. Then, quietly, a third piece of evidence surfaced. A man hiking near the canyon rim had taken a panoramic photo at dusk. He hadn't noticed anything unusual until he posted it online, but someone in a Reddit forum pointed it out. In the lower left corner, barely visible, almost part of the shadows, was a figure, standing at the edge, wearing a red jacket. Diane magnified the photo. Her heart nearly stopped. The jacket was Lucas's, the one he'd worn the day he vanished. Mateo didn't have that jacket. Not when they found the cave. Not when they found the remains. So either someone had moved it, or someone was still wearing it. Was it the man with the scar? Was it someone else? Or, in the most terrifying version of the truth, had Mateo, in his grief, in his breakdown, in his unraveling, become the Watcher himself? By now, Diane was no longer thinking like a detective. She wasn't even thinking like someone trying to solve a case. It had evolved beyond that. This wasn't just about evidence or timelines. This was about a story, one that had looped around itself so many times it was impossible to see where it began or where it would end. Mateo wasn't just lost in the wilderness. He was lost in something deeper, in memory, in guilt, in whatever darkness had followed them out of that canyon. And Lucas had never really left, had he? His voice lived in the journal, in the places Mateo returned to, in the jacket that kept appearing like a marker. The red jacket. That was the key. Diane requested a new forensic analysis of the original remains found near the cave, Lucas's remains. Not to reconfirm identity. That was solid. But to search for missing items. Namely, the jacket. Because if the red jacket had been found after Lucas's death, in a photo taken months later, then either someone else had it, or Lucas hadn't died when they thought he did. The results came in. Diane stared at the list, her pulse thudding. The forensic notes mentioned boots, bone fragments, the camera, but no jacket. The red jacket was never logged with the remains. Never recovered, which meant someone had taken it. Not scavengers, Not weather. Someone. And now it was appearing again and again, just out of reach. She brought David into her office and showed him the latest photograph, the one taken from the canyon rim. David's face drained of color. "That's not just any jacket," he said. "Lucas stitched something inside it. A quote from his favorite movie." "What quote?" Diane asked. David hesitated, his voice cracking. "We go together, or not at all." The words hit like a slow explosion in Diane's chest. The implications were dizzying. The phrase wasn't just sentimental. It was a code, a private truth. If the jacket was still out there, and someone was wearing it, there was a chance, however small, however impossible, that Lucas had survived longer than anyone believed. Maybe even long enough to be seen. And if Lucas had survived, maybe Mateo hadn't been alone in his madness. Maybe he'd been following something real. Romero, one of the newest forensic techs, cross-referenced the drone footage, photos, and path data. She laid it out on the floor of the station's war room like an aerial crime novel. And what they saw chilled them all. Every time Mateo had reappeared, the bunker, the gas station, the shelter, the red jacket had been spotted within a 5-mile radius, like a shadow trailing him, or leading him. Either Mateo had been carrying it, or he had been following it. And then came the final clue. A journal entry, buried in the back of the blue spiral notebook, written in the corner like it was an afterthought. The date was smudged, but the words were clear. "He wore the jacket to remind me. He says I left him, but I didn't. I didn't. He says I'm the one who buried him, but I remember holding his hand in the cave. So how can he be standing outside it now?" Diane put the notebook down and said the one thing she hadn't let herself say out loud. Either Mateo is hallucinating, or someone is wearing Lucas's skin. And in that moment, even silence felt like it was listening. The canyon was quiet the day they went back. Not the kind of peaceful quiet you find on an early morning hike, but the kind that feels wrong. The kind that presses against your ears like a vacuum. Diane led the team herself this time. No uniforms, no media, just 4 people who had been with the case from the beginning. David, Romero, an experienced tracker named Joel, and Diane. They weren't just looking for Mateo anymore. They were looking for whatever was left. Not just of him, but of the truth. The version that had been twisted, buried, burned, and rewritten over the course of 4 long, impossible years. They followed the ridge, the one where the silhouette had been captured in that blurry panoramic photo. The red jacket, the ghost, the shadow. As they climbed, David whispered something without realizing. "We go together, or not at all." The words caught in the air like an echo, like they didn't just belong to him, like they'd been left there, waiting to be spoken again. Joelle was the first to stop. She raised a hand and crouched, scanning the dirt ahead. "Footprints," she said. "Barefoot. 1 set." The prints were erratic, weaving, overlapping, as if the person had been stumbling, or dancing, or fighting something invisible. They led to a shallow cave carved into the sandstone, and at the mouth of that cave, the red jacket. Folded, placed, waiting. Romero went pale. "That wasn't there yesterday," she said. They had swept the ridge less than 24 hours earlier. Whatever this was, it was fresh. Diane approached slowly, kneeling beside the jacket like she was approaching a grave. "It's his," she said. "Lucas's. I'd know it anywhere." She reached out, gently turning it over. Inside the collar, in faded thread, "We go together, or not at all." And beneath the jacket, flattened by its weight, was a final page, torn from the spiral notebook. This one wasn't written in shaky, broken handwriting. It was clean, controlled. Mateo's old writing. Clear. Present. "If you've come this far, then I'm gone. But I need you to know something before you decide what comes next. He was never real. Not in the way you think. The man in red, the watcher, the one with the scar, they were pieces. Of my fear. Of my guilt. I made them. I had to, because the truth is worse. I let go of his hand, and then I didn't know who I was anymore. Diane sat back. Wind moved through the canyon. Do you think he's gone? David asked, barely above a whisper. Diane didn't answer right away. She was staring at the cave. The shadows inside it shifted just slightly, not from anything alive. Just the light, the earth turning. Finally, she said, "No, I think he left the story. Not because he died, but because he didn't want to be found anymore." Romero turned to David. "Do you want to go in?" David looked at the cave, the jacket, the journal. Then he shook his head. "No, not if he didn't want us to." So they left it there. The jacket, the words, the final truth, or maybe just the last version of it. Because some stories don't end. They just go quiet. 6 months passed. The canyon returned to silence. No more sightings. No more notes. The wind erased what few footprints had been left, and the cave mouth slowly swallowed the jacket in dust. Mateo Salazar remained classified as missing, presumed alive, but everyone involved knew better. He had chosen this. Not death, not disappearance. Something quieter, something stranger. A kind of surrender that looked too much like escape to call anything else. Diane kept the case open on her desk, but she stopped checking the tip line every morning. David moved back to Portland. He started teaching again, and every now and then he would drive outside the city at night, just far enough to see the stars. He'd sit beneath them, sometimes whispering that line, "We go together," or "not at all," and wonder if somewhere, somehow, Mateo could still hear it. Romero wrote her final report with reluctant hands. She didn't know what to label it. Not a homicide. Not quite a missing persons case. It had traces of obsession, love, trauma, folklore. It didn't behave like crime. It behaved like mythology. And when she sent it to her supervisor, she didn't call it the Salazar Weaver case. She called it simply the Red Trail. And then came the letter. Unmarked envelope. No return address. Mailed to David's apartment. Inside, a single photo. A mountainside somewhere. Pines. A lake. And at the edge of the water, barely visible, a man, thin, bearded, hands tucked in the sleeves of a red jacket. His face turned away. His figure small. On the back, written in Mateo's unmistakable handwriting, "You didn't let go. I just got tired." David stared at the card for hours. Then he pinned it above his desk, beside an old photograph of him, Lucas, and Mateo at a cabin one winter, arms around each other, cheeks flushed from laughter. Somewhere in the forest, the man in red walks still. Whether he's real or not doesn't matter anymore. He's part of the story now, and the people who loved him, they carry the ending he chose.